This week on the Brody File, a special edition, the immigration crisis in America. Our special guest, evangelical leader Ralph Reed, who breaks down the biblical argument.
Both the Mosaic Law and the New Testament teaches two parallel principles about immigrants.
Plus, we head for the border. No, not Taco Bell, but Texas. A talk with reporter Heather Sells, who has seen it all up close. And the blame game. Democrats and Republicans go after each other. We take a closer look. This special edition of the Brody File is next. And welcome everybody to this special edition of the Brody File. We are taking a closer look at the immigration crisis in America, and look, where do we begin? You know, in a way, we wish we had a few hours to do this show because there is so much to unpack, but let's start with this. Right now, this country has seen tens of thousands of kids and families from Central America make their way into America illegally in just the last few months. Many are sick, very poor, but what should we do with them? Well, President Obama is trying to get more money from Congress to handle the situation, but the GOP wants to make sure that before giving out any money, that the administration speed up the deportation process. Right now, current law says that these kids get a hearing in front of a judge, but that means they can end up staying for years, even permanently. However, there is a movement in Congress to change the law so that more are deported, quicker. Now, meanwhile, these kids are being brought to holding buildings in towns in California, across America. They're waiting for hearings. Protesters are out in force saying they need to go back right away, and others say we need to show compassion. Well, our newsmaker of the week has a thing or two to say about this from a conservative Christian perspective. Ralph Reed is head of the Faith and Freedom Coalition. You know, we like to call him here at the Brody File an evangelical mover and shaker. The Brody File spoke to him recently when we were doing some interviews for the One America News Network. We want you to have a look at how he lays out the immigration topic from a biblical perspective, and there are two key themes: the law and compassion.
What we believe is that the current immigration system is broken. It doesn't work. It's a travesty, and we don't believe that it reflects biblical teaching on immigration. And I'll spare you the scriptural exegesis, but in a nutshell, both the Mosaic Law and the New Testament teaches two parallel principles about immigrants. Number one, we are commanded, this is in the Mosaic Law, to show compassion and kindness to the stranger and the foreigner and the alien. And the reason for that is, and this was God speaking to the Jews, He said, because you were aliens in a strange land, and you should never forget it. Now here's what's interesting about that. This was God saying to the Jews, you were aliens, you were sojourners, they were a nomadic people who were oppressed. And He was saying, remember, that's what you were, so show kindness to those who are now. What were we as Americans? We were all immigrants. Everybody except the Native Americans came here. My forebears came here from Ireland. So I think what God would say to us is, you were once an immigrant. Your forebears came here, so show compassion and kindness. That's one principle. The other principle is obey the law. You know, if you are an immigrant or an alien or a sojourner or a foreigner, show respect for the law of the country to which you aspire to reside and ultimately become a citizen. That's why at Faith and Freedom we oppose a path to citizenship for people who entered the country illegally. We believe very strongly if you, however you want to call it, regularize them or grant them a special path to citizenship, you're saying to every other immigrant who waited in line, sometimes for years, played by the rules and obeyed by the law, that there was no advantage to their doing so. They could have just as easily gotten the same benefit by breaking the law. You shouldn't send that kind of message.
just so I understand, obey the law first, if you will.
Yeah.
And then compassion will follow.
Well, I think you should show compassion regardless. But I think in the case of breaking the law, look, I don't know what ends up being done with the people who entered the country illegally. But we would not favor them being granted citizenship unless they first came forward, paid a fine, paid whatever penalties and back taxes they owe, agree to learn English, and we believe that they should have to return to their country of origin, do at least a touchback provision, go to the U.S. Embassy, apply for legal entry, and then they can get in the back of the line, okay? The thing that we feel most strongly about, David, has nothing to do with the people who are here illegally. It has to do with the people who are not here yet, who are the minor children or the spouses of legal residents. These are people who are here legally. They came here legally. They have green cards. In some cases, they're citizens. And today, there are 1 million people who are the children or the husbands or wives of legal residents, and they are waiting in lines, depending upon the country of origin, for 3 to 10 years. And under our current law, they are given no priority whatsoever.
All right, coming next, we head to the border, Texas specifically, for an exclusive report from CBN reporter Heather Sells, who is on the ground there. We're back in a moment. And welcome back to the Brody File. We're taking a look at the immigration crisis happening right now at the Texas and Arizona border. You know, the CBN News team has been on the ground throughout this entire situation. CBN News reporter Heather Sells shows us the many sides of the debate and the evangelicals working to show Christ's love in the midst of it all.
It almost looks like a daycare center, but this is the McAllen Border Patrol Station, just across the Rio Grande from Reynosa, Mexico. This scene is repeated up and down the river valley. Thousands of children, mainly from Central America, packing out stations intended to serve just a small amount of people at a time.
This story, of course, is playing out 24/7 here on the border. As we were shooting footage here along the river, we witnessed a young man being escorted across the Rio Grande River and then moments later surrendering to Border Patrol.
The agent said nothing to us as our camera rolled, seemingly too busy with what has become a crushing workload. To find out why so many kids are coming over now, we traveled across the border to a Christian shelter in Reynosa, Mexico. Many immigrants rest here, then decide whether or not to cross. We met 15-year-old Brian, who says he traveled alone some 1,500 miles from Honduras to find work in the U.S., and provide a better life for his mom back home.
Before leaving Honduras, I fasted a lot. I told God, help me, Lord. I wanted to help my family get ahead in life.
Brian also explained a dream he had that motivated him to go.
People would tell me, if immigration catches you, they will help you a lot.
As our bilingual producer Myra Alejandra spoke with Brian and others, a clearer picture emerged beyond the usual immigration talking points coming out of Washington. First, the journey from the 3 main sending countries, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, is incredibly expensive. Smugglers often charge families $4,000 per child. And the trek is dangerous, with Mexican drug cartels quick to assault, kill, or traffic vulnerable children and women. Some, like 15-year-old Wilmer, travel alone and hop trains to try and cross quickly.
One of the hardest parts of my trip here was riding the train, enduring the cold, and running the risk of falling off the train.
We also learned that a so-called perfect storm of events has led thousands of families to choose now to send their children across the border. We met Maribel in the Guatemalan consulate in McAllen. She was attempting to pick up her friend's detained children after receiving a call from Border Patrol. She said the parents recently paid a smuggler after hearing that Border Patrol would release kids to their parents in the U.S.
And the parents decided to, okay, this is the time, because everybody thinks it's easy.
The head of the Honduran consulate in McAllen says many parents have believed the same rumor.
It's believed that the parents who are living in the U.S. have been misinformed about some sort of amnesty that the U.S. government would be providing the minors with.
Those kind of statements provide ammunition to the president's critics, and it's why possible presidential contender, Texas Governor Rick Perry, says Obama's immigration policies have failed. Liberals quickly point to escalating violence in Central America as a root cause for the surge, and that, too, we found, was a common motivation. At a Catholic shelter in McAllen, Lillian, a young single Honduran mom, told us that the gangs and violence ruled life in her city.
I had a temporary job. I would get out at 8 p.m., and I could not go into my neighborhood because they would kill me.
That leads to one subject both sides can agree on. These immigrants have suffered greatly for the chance to live in America. That pain is also leaving a mark on the local church volunteers who hear their stories. Jeanette Alanius washes bedding for a shelter and spoke with one young mom who was abandoned by smugglers before they reached the border.
She was dropped off, no food, maybe water once in a while. She was able to nurse her baby during that period of time, but the baby was getting weaker and weaker. Most of the time they were literally outside in the brush. So by the time I saw the baby, covered with bug bites, totally dehydrated.
Going forward, it's clear that the process of sorting out who stays and who's sent back will take months, if not years. Some women and children who fled violence will stay as refugees, others as trafficking victims, and others will face deportation. Texas Senator John Cornyn spoke to CBN News about the process after visiting the Border Patrol station in McAllen.
This is an opportunity to treat these young children and other migrants in a humanitarian sort of way. The difficulty, I think, lies in where does the line get drawn, and where does a rule-based society intersect with our compassion?
Ultimately, Cornyn believes an immigration system with clearly enforced rules is the most humane. No one knows yet, of course, just how many of the immigrants in this current surge will be allowed to stay. So, for now, Brian is staying safe in the shelter before he decides whether or not he'll cross. Wilmer, on the other hand, has decided to return.
I took a risk with my brother to help my mom. But since now I am here alone and I lost my brother, I want to go back.
And Lillian says she will continue to pray and trust God for a better life for her daughter.
The judge will decide whether we get to stay or we get deported. And well, God is great and mighty, and only He knows. If it's for our welfare, great, and if I get sent back to my country, it's okay. It will be God's will.
And Heather Sells joins us now. Look, Heather, this topic has really been a specialty of yours. I'm trying to get a sense of where the evangelical community at large is on the immigration issue, because it really does seem hard to pin down here.
Yes, it's interesting because a lot of times it seems like on political issues, maybe you'll have more consensus within the evangelical community taking a certain position. But on this issue, I am really seeing the tension between law and grace, if you will. And people are having a hard time coming down firmly on either side. And I think going forward, what's going to be interesting, David, is as these immigrant children are moved to different communities, and what is the church's response going to be? We're already seeing some protests in some communities, and we're also seeing the church feeling like it wants to minister to these kids. So I think the church really has an opportunity to take some leadership on this issue as these children are moved to different communities within Texas and within the country.
Heather, I am curious, because you obviously went down there to Texas. What made an impression on you down there?
I think what really struck Myra Alejandra, my bilingual producer, and myself is the difference in the stories. We were hearing all kinds of stories. We were hearing from kids and women who were fleeing violence. We were hearing from people who just wanted a better life. We were hearing from people who were saying, hey, we heard that the Border Patrol was a little more relaxed, and now is our time. So it's really interesting to me as I hear the political debate around everything, because a lot of advocates on either side want to pigeonhole, and peg these stories. But there's a lot of different stories out there, David.
Listen, we need to wrap quickly, but I am curious. You did live in Honduras for more than a decade. I'm curious what that experience might have done for you to kind of help better inform your reporting on this issue.
Yeah, what I can tell you is that 12 years ago when I lived there, it was a relatively peaceful country. There were crime concerns, but nothing major. That has vastly changed since. And now our friends who live in Honduras are trying to get out. Their kids are housebound because of the violence. And so it is a very, very dangerous place to live right now. And so I have a lot of sympathy for immigrants who say, hey, we feared for our lives and needed to get out.
Heather Sells, reporter extraordinaire. We appreciate it. Thank you so much, Heather. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
All right, when we come back, it's a show we like to call the blame game. Republicans versus Democrats on immigration. Oiga Volt. Back in a moment. And welcome back to a special edition of the Brody File. We're talking immigration during this half hour. Hey, look, everyone recognizes that we have an immigration problem in this country. Republicans like to blame President Obama. Democrats blame insensitive Republicans. The Brody File blames our psychiatrist. Anyhow, all we know is that it's time to play the blame game. Well, we start the blame game off with one word: diseases. A plural word, by the way. You have many conservatives and now some Border Patrol officials blaming the spread of disease on the huge influx of illegal immigrants coming into the country. The VP of the Border Patrol Union, Chris Cabrera, says that a lot of agents are coming down with diseases, specifically scabies or lice, and he says many of these diseases haven't been seen in decades. But perhaps the biggest threat could come from the immigration of dangerous gang members from the infamous MS-13. Now, the MS-13 is a gang. It's made headlines over the last few years. Gruesome, brutal murders here in the United States, and actually many of the members hail from the Central American countries at the center of all this immigration crisis. Well, we spoke with a person who knows a lot about the topic, Fox News contributor Katie Palvich.
The Border Patrol Processing Center in Nogales has confirmed, agents there have confirmed that at least 16 unaccompanied minors have admitted to being members of the very violent El Salvadorian MS-13 gang. And what that means is they're coming through just as any other minor would, and they're getting processed. And the reason that the agents found out that they were in MS-13 is because they left gang signs and graffiti on the bathroom walls at the processing center. And after some investigation, the young men admitted to being members.
Gangs and diseases, all part of the flashpoints of debate in this very hot topic. All right, coming up next on the Brody File, what would Jesus do about the border crisis? WWJBC, I don't know. Anyhow, I know it's a saying that's been tossed around for years, but how should Christians respond when it comes to the highly divisive issue? A special Brody File commentary. Next, I ran out of breath. And welcome back to this special immigration edition of the Brody File. All right, look, there is no doubt that this issue is a toxic one. It's emotional, it's complex. All that said, what are evangelicals to do when it comes to balancing the law with compassion? Well, that's the subject of this week's Brody File commentary. It is an obvious question. What should be done about the immigration crisis on the border with all these children flocking to it to escape their horrible lives in their Central American homes? Well, the Brody File thinks what is needed is a smart combination of both compassion and the law. Look, folks, my heart goes out to these children. We are, though, a country that has laws, and granted, they haven't been enforced too well from an immigration perspective. But if America starts letting in everyone who is living under bad circumstances in their international hometown, well, then what? The Brody File would suggest that we'd have a much larger problem than what's going on right now. However, there has to be compassion too. The Bible commands it. In Matthew, it says this: "For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Look, I think the answer here is individual compassion. In other words, the government has to enforce our immigration laws. However, that doesn't mean we have to be bystanders who just don't care about the individual. We need to help in whatever way we can to help improve these Central American communities. For example, we can go into these communities with our Bibles and the message of Jesus Christ. We can support families in need financially. We can, of course, pray for these kids. We need to get involved and active in some way individually to help provide a better life for these children. That is compassion. Now look, Glenn Beck is doing it. He's bringing tractor trailers full of food, water, teddy bears, soccer balls down to McAllen, Texas, and he's trying to help feed and care for tens of thousands of these kids. Also, how about the Reverend Samuel Rodriguez? We call him Sammy, and he's out in California. First of all, he's leading an effort to broadcast public service announcements back in El Salvador and Honduras and Nicaragua and Guatemala, and he's telling parents not to bring their children with them to the border. But also, his organization is actually part of a church-wide effort to provide temporary shelter, food, and clothing. These children really do need all of that. And hey, look, folks, the bottom line is this. How about we not use all our energy complaining about the immigration situation and instead use that energy to help people out? Let's go, folks. We are America. We are compassionate. We're back in a moment with this week's Oy Vey Moment of the Week. It's a classic Harry Reid special. And welcome back to our immigration show here on the Brody File. Look, before we leave you, we have a specifically themed immigration Oy Vey Moment of the Week. Well, folks, Harry Reid has done it again. He's inserted his foot into his mouth. The Hill newspaper is reporting that at the Senate Democrats' weekly policy luncheon, he blurted out the following line behind closed doors. Here it is, quote, "The border is secure." That's right. Well, you know, after the meeting, he doubled down, telling reporters, quote, "Senator Martin Heinrich talked to the caucus today. He's a border state senator. He said he can say without any equivocation the border is secure." So folks, there you have it. Harry Reid says secure, the border is secured because one of his Democrat buddies in the Senate said that was the case. We can now all sleep at night. And by the way, this Oy Vey moment may be hard to top. However, Harry Reid has another Oy Vey moment, and it is a comedian's dream. Take a look at this.
Today is a big day in America. Only 36,000 people lost their jobs today, which is really good.
Harry Reid, a comedian's dream come true. That does it for this week's immigration special. Until next time, everybody, God bless. Have a great week.